If you say to yourself, I wish I had my time over again, I think I'd make the same mistakes. You haven't done nearly as much as you should have. I was a school teacher and I loved that, but even then I think, oh dear, I wish I'd done more. There are good things and bad things to look back on, and even though I've lived 100 years, I think it's a wonderful privilege that I'm still alive and that the conference has progressed. It's no use thinking about the past really, except we should learn lessons from the past.
"100 years. That can look like a long time, right? But from another perspective, it represents less than 2 lifespans of our mortality. Yet in the context of the Adventist mission in the north of New South Wales, the accomplishments from the work done in the last 100 years are eternal. The North New South Wales Conference has been blessed with natural beauty, empowering diversity, missional energy, and God's abundant favour. We now celebrate more than 90 congregations of people meeting every Sabbath morning, from the red soil of Bourke to the bustling streets of Newcastle and Gosford. From small groups meeting in homes to the largest congregations in Australia. In Adventist education, 3,840 students are attending the 9 schools that dot the eastern seaboard from the Central Coast to the Tweed. Within these schools, there are 338 dedicated teachers and staff. 800 residents are being provided Christ-centred care in the facilities operated by Adventist Senior Living. Communities are being served, families are being nurtured, young people are being trained. In all our initiatives, the everlasting gospel is being preached in the context of the 3 angels' messages, preparing this corner of God's kingdom for his soon return. But have you considered, how have we got to this point?
The North New South Wales Conference has been around for 100 years.
But the work had already begun, and there was a lot of evangelistic effort had gone in long before the conference was actually officially started.
It began back in 1898 when Ellen White had encouraged the church leaders to organize a camp meeting for the Newcastle area.
In Gregson Park, just opposite the Hamilton Church. And it was out of that evangelistic series that church was formed. She also attended the camp meeting in Maitland in 1899, and out of that the Maitland Church was formed. So her fingerprints are all over stuff that happened and is still happening, is still a unique part of the North New South Wales Conference. She established Avondale College, Sanitarium and Adventist Education. All of those institutions reside within the conference, and therefore had a huge influence on bringing people to the conference to engage and work with those institutions.
The Adventist Church in Australia started in 1896 with just 26 members. But with the dedicated work of our pioneers, the growth was rapid. By 1920, there were 13,000 members, many of whom lived in New South Wales, bringing the necessity of a division of the territory. To facilitate the mission of the church more efficiently, it was decided one conference for the entire state was too big. And at the 24th constituency meeting of the New South Wales Conference, held in Parramatta Park 1919, the North New South Wales Conference was formed, officially commencing the year after under the leadership of Pastor J. M. Cole.
I'll tell you about Pastor Cole. Well, I was 3 years of age, or not quite 3, when we moved from Strathfield to Newcastle. And the first night when we arrived, we slept in a tent in the backyard of Pastor J. M. Cole. He was a very good president, but he was had a good sense of humour. While we were in the backyard and we were all milling around, and I was only 3, a little girl, Pastor Cole bent down and took a woolen cap off my head and put it on his head. And I didn't know why he was doing that. And then he bent down and he said, "Now you pull that cap off my head." And he knelt down and I picked it up. There inside the cap was his skull. It looked like to me. And there he had a bare head. And I had taken off his wig that I didn't even know about. And everybody was laughing, and here's me embarrassed as a little 3-year-old wondering what I'd done.
The 1920s was a time of great modernisation. The car was just being manufactured in Australia for the first time. And you look at the minutes of the executive committee in those times, and they were really grappling with the issue of going from paying for a bridle or a saddle for the pastor to giving a mileage allowance as they were driving their cars. So it was a time of modernisation and of change. During the 1930s, things were obviously very challenging. The Great Depression had started. The church finances were under threat from that. Many people were unemployed. But during that time, people had a sense of need. And so the conference did continue to grow despite the many challenges.
Each decade of our existence was marked by several accomplishments for the kingdom. Our history is filled with countless lessons for today. From the start of this conference to the opening of schools, aged care facilities, new congregations, camp meetings, and many other projects and initiatives, there's much to look back on. So, let's start with schools.
Education has been a huge part of the North New South Wales Conference. The first school, Avondale, was started in 1897. The second one in Newcastle, now Macquarie College, started in 1901. Before the conference started, but still very significant parts of what this conference is all about. And then the evangelists, as they went out, grew churches and then started a school. Lismore, Moolumbar, Mullumbimby, Maxville, Taree, Kempsey. All of these were started in small rural towns in order to educate the minds of the children. The purpose of education has probably changed from an institution that's protecting and educating Adventist children in order to protect them from the world to an opportunity to be the best evangelistic tool for the conference. During the 1980s and 1990s, the education system grew very rapidly as more were accepted into Adventist education, and it became a very powerful evangelistic tool.
We currently have 9 schools. We have nearly 4,000 students in our schools from Gosford through to the Queensland border, and 80% of those students, so 80% of our client base, is non-Adventist. And so the community are super keen to plug into the Adventist mindset and worldview and to participate in our schools. Our sub-branding as North New South Wales Schools is the bridge. And the notion of the bridge is simply this: developing minds and connecting hearts. Christ was a bridge between heaven and earth, between an experience with God and an experience without God. And what we want our schools to be, and this is where the authenticity kicks in, we want to be that bridge now between Christ and a community that don't know him.
Another institution that has been reaching out to people on a daily basis is Adventist Senior Living. It started back in 1960 as a rest home for returning missionaries and now has grown to 6 facilities across our conference.
We see ourselves as the hands of Christ. There's a lot of people in our villages and in our facilities that they're looking back on their lives and wondering if it's had meaning, and we have the opportunity to reassure them that it has, and to just be there for them and care for them. That's really important, and it's an opportunity for us to reach out to people of other faiths. The retirement village at Avondale is one of the oldest in Australia, certainly in New South Wales and possibly in Australia as well. We've been established for, 60 years now.
It's grown so much. It's been such an incredible success story. It's had great leadership over the years. And now with 6 facilities across the conference, with hundreds and hundreds of residents, both in residential care and in independent living units, it has been a huge part of caring for our ageing Seventh-day Adventists, but also an outreach opportunity as people have moved into these communities.
From the earliest years, literature evangelists crossed the land from north to south and east to west, selling Adventist books and literature. As a result of their efforts and people listening to the Voice of Prophecy radio broadcast, many isolated areas were reached, forming new Adventist communities. Many churches were also started in rural areas because of dedicated public evangelists.
Really, the golden age for evangelism in the North New South Wales Conference was the 1940s to the 1960s, when evangelists would travel throughout the rural parts of the conference. Evangelists like J.W. Kent and George Burnside would go out to these country towns, stay there for months, and plant a church in that town. And many of the churches we see today in our rural towns were started during that period.
Rapid expansionistic growth that takes it into all sorts of places, sees some of the largest churches anywhere in Australia at the time pop up in this conference. Like one of them was in Mullumbimby. It's a very small church now, but back in the day was like the largest church with the largest youth group, a very large solid school. It was amazing. And all of that was the work of pioneers who just were like so sold out for Jesus that what did they want to do? They wanted to take the message to as many places as they can, which is why farming communities were reached. People on push bikes would literally ride into farms and then ride out to another one. Absolutely inspirational kind of stuff, and all driven for one purpose, to take the gospel to all the world. My mum, who grew up in the Cooranbong area, ended up living on a farm owned by the Smiths, a farm called Muddabun out the back end of Lightning Ridge. But there, that was the birthplace of one of the churches from that farm, which was the Church of Lightning Ridge. And within a couple of years, the church there in Lightning Ridge had decided, or the people around there decided, yes, we wanted a church. So they approached the conference arranged some finance for them. This was in the late 1960s. And then within a couple of years, by the time the church was built, the church had actually paid off all its debts back to the conference. So that's less than 2 years, which is somewhat of a record. And the obvious question that I asked the people out there was, how did you do it? And they said, it was really easy. We live in Lightning Ridge. So what would you do? They got together, had a prayer meeting, bought a claim for a mine, sunk down a hole, started mining for opals, and sold all the opals to pay off the church. So by the time the church was open, they were debt-free.
One of the things that I think is somewhat unique is the strong influence of the church in the rural areas and the smaller places. I guess we were early in the process of church planting. It's very much part of the agenda today. And having had that kind of experience, I'm very much in favour of this whole movement of establishing new congregations, planting new groups of people.
It's a very geographically diverse conference, so you can drive 10 hours and still not be at the boundary of the conference. So to get to those churches, it's much easier to fly. And the Adventist Aviation Association has been willing to support the conference in an incredible way for many, many years, flying pastors and youth and lay people out to support these small churches.
I used to fly with Adventist Aviation Association to Western New South Wales, and during that time I helped to run a local Pathfinder club, while other members of the team went and did evangelistic work, door to door, visitation, Bible studies, and all of that was very important in that particular little town. And being a small town, everybody knew about it, so it was a vital connection and helped to build up the church in that particular town.
A little act of kindness never goes astray, so why not find a way to lend a hand? Do you need a hand? Do you need a hand? Be the first to say, do you need a hand? If you see some trouble coming, don't look the other way. Get right in and say, do you need a hand? Do you need a hand? Do you need a hand? Step right up and say, do you need a hand?
Our churches has always been on the forefront, very active, involved in responding to the needs of their community.
In 1989, we had an earthquake, and we were all taken by surprise because no one ever thought we would have an earthquake in Newcastle. It was a rather disastrous affair, something we would never have imagined would happen. The Adventist Church was to care for people who could not go back to their houses, who'd been displaced and had nowhere to go. And so our job was to find some accommodation for them and their families. The Adventist Church was fairly heavily involved just in responding to that disaster. We were very thankful to be involved, and we had a number of people say, what would we do without your services? And so we were glad to help them to find somewhere to stay.
Since the start of the North New South Wales Conference, community and human crisis has always been part of our life. And our church, under the guidance of the Dorcas Society and later ADRA, the work of ADRA, our church has been very active, not just our church, but also members. And we have seen the major earthquake in 1989, we've seen floods, we've seen tornadoes, we've seen droughts and fires. Our conference in 2017 saw the need of reactivating our churches into caring for their local community. We currently have, under the umbrella of ADRA, Adventist Community Service, as well as Independent Adventist Services, 52 community programs that are operating in our conference. And that ranges from our food pantries to food vans that are operating out there in the outer west. We've got a bus running, picking up Indigenous people, feeding them, feeding farmers. We've got soup kitchens that are operating in our conference, feeding people that are homeless or living on the street, trying to make a change in their life, to God's Closet, where we help families to clothe their kids during difficult times.
We're blessed to have a food pantry that runs every Thursday. It's a real blessing to be able to be meeting the needs of our community here. And as people have their physical needs met and the food that they need being provided, many are open to meet Jesus.
We've had opportunity to make the community aware of who we are, whereas maybe 100 years ago, not too many people knew who we were. So we've been involved in our communities, and sometimes it might be the smallest thing. It might be picking up something someone has dropped. So opportunities flow our way, and the Holy Spirit gives us the opportunity to slip in there and do what God wants us to do.
It's beautiful to see how Adventists in North New South Wales have been serving and providing essential services for the community. But it's important to recognise that there is one segment of our society that we haven't done well with in the past, and that is the work with Indigenous people. In acknowledging that, new initiatives have been implemented in response to their needs.
I believe that Adventist has a tool of reaching that community for Christ that no one else has, and that is by responding to their most difficult crisis in their life. Indigenous people live with a history of abuse, of trauma, and they have the highest levels of depression and anxiety. And therefore, our conference provided us with funds to do 2 trials to work with this community. Our selection criteria was it had to be people that had been on medication for depression and anxiety for many years, and they were treatment resistant. In other words, there was no change happening. We were especially looking for people that had a history of trauma as well as major anxiety. We tested them when they started with extreme severe anxiety and depression, multiple other mental health issues like addictions, suicidality was part and parcel of the history of many of those people. We took them on a 10-day program, both groups, and we tested them 9 days later. 9 days later, as a group, they had mild depression. They had no anxiety. We brought in medical doctors that were not part of the program to test these people, to go through the medical history, because some of them started to get sick. And the conclusion that the doctors came to was that the medication now that they've been using for many years were too strong for them. They had to start to reduce the medication. And that is exactly what we were hoping would happen.
They have a love of God and of spiritual things. They're difficult to work with because they've got a different worldview to us, and we really need to think missionarily minded to reach them. But God has called us to go to every nation, tribe, kindred, tongue, and people.
In addition to focusing on ministry to Indigenous communities, the North New South Wales Conference has planned and organised a wide variety of evangelistic initiatives, one of which is Arise. Train Bible workers support local churches in their outreach activities to their local communities.
Young people contribute a lot to our church. They have a lot of energy, a lot of enthusiasm, and are always excited to get involved in being a part of something bigger than themselves.
Ellen White once wrote that our youth, rightly trained, are a powerful force. The North New South Wales Conference has always believed that. They've always had a very, very passionate youth ministry. And so the conference really wanted to find a way to invest in them, to train them, to equip them, to take their faith seriously and to have the tools in their hands to be able to share their faith. And so it was opportunistic that David Asherick was visiting the conference and Ty Gibson. They already had a school developed called Arise in America, and we started talking to them.
And so we all sat down in a room at the conference office and had a conversation about God's work and discipleship training, and it just seemed like we were all going in the same direction, and that the North New South Wales Conference could be benefited and blessed by having its own discipleship training program.
They were very happy to partner with the conference, and in 2013, Arise was born.
We decided to make it a part of the evangelism department, that we would run an Arise in Australia.
With David and Ty and various other presenters, they committed to coming every year, and we filled that out with other speakers from within Australia, and it became just a very powerful program. Arise was started to make disciples. It was designed to help people deepen their own experience, but also give them the tools to share their faith.
So Arise gives us a lot of opportunity to go out door knocking or survey or doing a Bible study. And through that experience, we learn to share our faith with other people boldly. Oftentimes we think we don't know a lot. And for myself, I just got baptized as an Adventist 1 month before I went to Arise. And I thought that I know nothing. I didn't think I could teach someone. But I can tell that God is working in someone's heart when we study the Bible with someone. And also, when I went out for door knocking, I kind of expect that nobody will be interested in like Bible study. But amazingly, some people just say, yeah, I want to study the Bible. And for me, I was like, did you just say you want to study the Bible? And that surprised me and also like built the faith in me as well.
Interestingly, for 5 consecutive years after starting Arise and taking Arise students and letting them volunteer in our conference and do ministry alongside of local churches, our baptisms increased for 5 straight years, which is extraordinary. And we hit 30-year records each year as we continue to increase those baptismal rates. And that was our hope, is that in doing Arise, we're thinking of the long-term benefit, not just doing short-term projects and kind of flashy things. We just thought we need to invest in people.
I think evangelism gives us this lens of how people's life will be transformed by the gospel. I know so many people that they did not know God. They just didn't know how to pray, didn't know how to believe in Him. But Jesus changed their life. My friend just led someone else to baptism, and she said that I didn't know God well because I didn't share to anyone, but through sharing her faith with other people, she learned of God more and more. And God called us to make a disciple and baptize them and teaching them all the things that we know. So through that process, we learn of God. So I think that's so important that we share our faith to other people.
From the very beginning of the conference, camps have been an essential part in empowering and uplifting the membership. And the memories are priceless. Like leading the family cow all the way from Currumbong to the campsite so that the family could have fresh milk every morning.
Camp meetings were inherited or brought in by our early pioneers from the Methodist Church and became a very big part of the Seventh-day Adventist scene.
As we talk to some of the older people in the conference, they remember big camp at Lismore or big camp near Raymond Terrace.
The conference has always owned a beautiful campground. In 1950, they purchased one in Gunnellabar. In 1947, they purchased one at Araring. There's been one at Byron Bay for 20 years, from 1969 to 1989. And then in the early 90s, they purchased Stewart's Point. And that's been around for the last 28 years. Araring was a campground right on Lake Macquarie, beautiful spot. It just became too small for the size of the conference, and so the conference moved on.
The church sold the property there at Araring and purchased property in Byron Bay. It's like, what wasn't to like about Byron Bay? So they built a whole new facility there. It was a magnificent facility right on the sand, a short walk to the beach and a short drive to the shops in Byron Bay.
An incredible location, very beautiful area.
Keeping people on the campground was a challenge because they had so many other attractions, but the rain sort of kept them there because it rained all the time.
It was just a disaster. 3 years in a row, it got so washed out there. There was inches of water on the ground.
Lots of rain.
It was great for ducks and for those who love mud.
Umbrella and gumboots were compulsory because they just knew it was going to rain, that they were going to be slopping around in mud.
By the time we got to the 3rd year, the locals of the hardware shop had a sign out the front of the shop saying, Adventist in town, come get your wet weather gear here. One year there was almost like a mini cyclone came through and blew the team tent over, and I'm watching, all the staff come in around and hold that tent. I would have been helping them, only I just painted my tent with a waterproofing compound. Total disaster, because it just opened all the pores of the tent and the rain came in even faster. And so we're bailing water out of our tent, but it didn't matter. It's like, you're at camp. We're gonna go to camp meeting. It's awesome.
And of course, that probably wasn't the biggest issue with the location, but it was too far north. For such a big conference, they needed something more central. And so around 1992, they opened Stewart's Point, and that was Pastor Rex Moe and Pastor Hank Panola opened that in 92. And it was very central from a north-south perspective of the conference, so easier for people to get to. Beautiful opportunity to lay out a campground from scratch, rather than having to buy something else and modify it. And so we have there today a really well laid out, very practical, dry campground, although it still does rain there at times. But it's a really, Big Camp is really central to what we do as an Adventist church, in that it's an opportunity for us all to gather together for spiritual refreshing, to encourage each other, inspire each other with reports, and to go home empowered and reinvigorated about the mission that God has given us to do here in this conference.
Grey Nomads has been an incredible initiative and such a positive impact on the conference. It was started in 2009, and really we need to credit John Lang and Bob Dale for that initiative. It grew just exponentially when it started, and now it's just a regular part of the conference calendar, and people look forward to it from all over Australia, and it's just a wonderful part of the journey of our senior members. They just love getting together, they love socialising.
It's like a great big reunion every year. We meet people from our college days, from all over the place, because they've moved around too. I just imagine heaven being like Grey Nomads, because you run into so many old friends from way back.
Grey Nomads now brings 600 people every year from all over Australia together at Stewart's Point, and they just have a ball. It's just a wonderful part of the conference calendar and will be forever. Camp meetings have always been a significant part of the North New South Wales Conference. Really, we'll only know in heaven the number of people that made decisions, were baptised, started their relationship, were married, all around the whole Big Camp program and in those sacred sites where people gathered in order to have time together in fellowship in the North New South Wales Conference.
Big camps were used in this country as an evangelistic opportunity of bringing people together and introducing them to the gospel of Jesus Christ. It was the environment where the three angels' messages were proclaimed to the community in Australia.
The COVID-19 pandemic has caused significant disruption to the normal conference calendar. Events have been cancelled, churches and schools closed. The aged care residential facilities went into lockdown, and all other major face-to-face events planned around the conference had to be abandoned. While the impact has been substantial, COVID has also created new and exciting opportunities for ministry and evangelism.
It was 1920 when this conference was formed, and it was 1919 when the Spanish flu was really powering through the world. And here we are 100 years later, and we have the COVID-19 happening.
North New South Wales has always been an innovative conference, and through that time it's gone through the Great Depression, the Second World War, the radical upheaval of society in the 1960s and 70s, and many, many other things. But God has been faithful through all that, and the people have been faithful. And God has been able to do great things through people that are committed to Him, regardless of the circumstances.
2019 and 2020 has been tumultuous years in terms of human crisis, and then coronavirus hit us, and all our church doors were closed. But guess what? Our community services became an essential service, and in other words, kept the doors of the church open for the community.
A lot of people having lost jobs during COVID and being in special need of food. And many have come along to different programs that we're running and that we've organized where people can be introduced to Jesus and to learn the gospel that has the power to change their lives.
So because of the coronavirus, this year is a little bit different. Usually we can do door knocking or survey at the university, but because of coronavirus, I couldn't even go out to university. There's no one there.
We as a departmental team, my Bible workers and my evangelist, we shifted all of our Bible studies onto Zoom. And then what we decided to do is, as a conference, to just do an online evangelistic campaign, the end. What the Bible has to say about the end of the world. We heard podcasts and news reports talking about the end of the world and is this the apocalypse and these kinds of things. And so we thought, well, let's get in on that. Let's do a series called The End. We didn't know what to expect, and we thought maybe 30, 40 live views. And The End was receiving 150 live views a night, like people watching through the whole program. And then the least amount of views we have on any presentation is about 2,000 on YouTube.
So this year I was mainly doing mailboxing as well, but mailboxing is the least successful too to find people. But God is good. He brought so many people to our church, to our community, and I did not expect this.
We are aware of a few exceptions when Big Camp wasn't possible to have, and sadly 2020 has been one of those years. The Conference Executive Committee met earlier this year and considered the risks that COVID posed to our community at large in Australia, and sadly the decision was reached to cancel Big Camp for the North New South Wales Conference earlier this year. It was a very hard decision to make because we know that Big Camp is such a highlight for our conference. I like to affirm and to recognize the beautiful creativity and initiative that has come from the young adults and youth department at that stage. They said, we may not be able to have a face-to-face Big Camp, but we are going to do something online.
So over the course of the Big Camp online program, we had the reach of the programs was over 40,000 people during the week that we were showing. This is a number that is much larger than our regular attendance. We normally at our Big Camp programs in the young adults tent historically have had about 300 to 600 people. However, across the week we had obviously much more than that who were interacting with it. On top of that, we had other people signing up for Bible studies, expressing interest in getting resources. And throughout the week we had several decisions that were made for baptism, and we were able to actually have one of those baptisms take place on the final Sabbath of the program, which was a great spiritual high. Looking back on the 100 years that have been and what might be in the future, I see young people stepping up and being trained in how to share their faith with their work colleagues, people in their spheres of influence, and being unashamed to share the reasons that they have for believing in Jesus Christ.
We should believe what God believes about us. And He believes He can take Matthew, the tax collector, and turn him into Matthew, the prophet, apostle, soul-winning man of God whose name is written on the heavenly cities.
We have nothing to fear for the future unless we forget the way the Lord has led us in our past.
Let's keep looking to the past to see God's leading so that our confidence can be strong in how He's going to lead in the future. He has blessed us amazingly. He's blessing us amazingly, and He's still going to do that.
Just remember where you came from in the past and what is the future. And the future is brighter.
Everything that happens in the world cries out to us that this world will come to an end very soon. And we are looking forward to that end, but we want everyone to hear about Jesus Christ.
It's a blessing to be a part of a conference that has an evangelistic outreach that is the focus, that's passionate about prayer, that prioritizes godly education.
At the North New South Wales Conference Office, there is a wall of former presidents. It's wonderful to walk past that wall and look at the faces of the presidents of the last 100 years. They're just symbols, I guess, of the incredible working of God in this conference.
I'm excited to be in North New South Wales Conference. I'm in my happy place and I just love what's going on in this conference. Just so many different exciting frontline, cutting edge ways of taking the three angels' messages to this conference and beyond. So I'm excited about what we're going into our 101st year because I can see God leading.
We have been so blessed in this conference, and there is much to be proud of. Looking back, we see people engaged in the mission of the church with a willingness to innovate and adapt. We thank God for the vision, for the faith and the sacrifice of all of our pioneers and faithful members, from the official beginnings of this conference in 1920 right up to the present time, here in 2020. We could measure the success of the North New South Wales Conference in many ways, whether it's baptisms, financial income, growth in the education or aged care systems. But at the end of the day, we're really not going to know the enormous impact ministry in this conference has had until we get to heaven. You know that we are living in challenging times, but we have been so blessed, and we want to thank you for your support and commitments. But there is still more to do. At this 100th year anniversary, we need to continue our faithfulness and connection with Jesus. We must continue to pursue new and innovative methods of reaching people with the good news of the gospel in the context of the three angels' messages of Revelation 14. We praise God for what He has done, and we're excited about what He's going to do between now and until the day He calls us home.